The walls of the plantation creaked like lungs drawing in dust. At dusk, when the sky bruised purple and the fields hushed, the house seemed to lean upon its foundations as though weary from keeping its secrets. The enslaved who passed beneath its eaves swore that when the shutters rattled, it was not the wind, but the groan of something trapped inside, something that had been fed on silence and sin for too long. The master never heard it. Men like him never did. He believed only in what coin could measure, what whip could enforce. But those who slept within its halls felt the pulse low and steady, like the drag of a bellows. At midnight the air thickened. At midnight the house exhaled. The ash came from the hearth, though no fire had burned there for years. Soot clung to the stone mantel like a disease, staining the air soft as breath against the skin. Servants whispered that the mistress's first child had been lost in that very room, carried out before it drew a scream, and the house had swallowed the sound whole. From that night forward, the hearth never warmed again, only breathed black. He, the one without chains, yet never free, had come to know the rhythm of its sighs. He heard them in his cot, in the corridor, even in the field when night settled. The sound lived in him as surely as the beating of his own heart. At times he wondered if the house had chosen him to hear it. Chosen him or cursed him. The night stretched long, cicadas hissing, dogs restless in the yard. He carried water up the stairwell, the weight biting into his shoulders. Each step he took stirred the wood beneath, but the creaks did not belong to his feet. The walls stirred, shifting as though flesh pressed against the plaster from within, straining to breathe. At the landing he paused. His breath turned white, though no cold lingered outside. The door to the parlor, where no one entered after sundown, shivered against its frame. His eyes locked on it, and for a heartbeat he swore the cracks in the wood inhaled. "Don't look too long," an old voice had once warned him in the kitchen shadows, an elder long since gone to the earth. "It breathes what you give it." "Stare, and it takes your breath too." He forced himself onward, water sloshing in the pail, the stairwell groaning with his passage. But still he heard it behind him, that exhalation long and mournful like a widow sighing into an endless night. The mistress claimed she never heard it. She would sit at her vanity, brushing hair pale as milk, humming songs from her childhood in Virginia. Yet her eyes, sharp and glass-cut, would flick to the walls when no one was watching, as if listening for something she dared not name. Once, as he poured her tea, she spoke low, not to him but to the air between them. "It mourns us. Do you feel it? The house knows what we've done." He did not answer. A slave's silence was armor, but he carried her words into the pit of his stomach, where fear brewed like spoiled wine. That night the sighs grew heavier. The walls rattled in rhythm, like the rise and fall of a sleeping giant's chest. Dust sifted from the rafters, coating the floorboards in grey. He lay on his pallet and closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead he heard the sound of dragging, ashes spilling across the floor, though no fire had been stoked. The air thickened. He rose bare feet against splinters and drifted to the corridor. The parlor door stood wide now, though he knew he had bolted it earlier. The hearth within glowed faint, not with flame, but with the dull shimmer of embers that should not exist. And there in the ash a shape stirred. A smear of soot crawling like a shadow across the stone. It was not formed, not yet, but it shivered with a breath that was not its own. He clutched the frame of the door. The boards under his hand thrummed almost warmly, as if a pulse ran through the wood. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, a voice rose, a sigh stretched into syllables, wordless but heavy. It carried sorrow, it carried hunger. He stepped back, nearly dropping the bucket. His chest burned with the need to draw air, but the room pulled at it, as though the house itself wanted to take his breath into its lungs. The parlor darkened, embers vanishing, the hearth choking itself silent once more, and in that silence he felt watched. Not by master, not by mistress. By something older, crouched in the beams, waiting to be named. Behind him the stair groaned. The sound of a barefoot step descended, slow and deliberate. He did not turn, he dared not. The air carried the faint perfume of lilies, the scent the mistress wore to hide her sleeplessness. And yet when he glanced to the window pane, he saw no reflection behind his own. Only the streak of grey ash sliding down the glass, as if the house itself had pressed its lips there to breathe. The walls sighed once more, and the bucket in his hand tipped, spilling water across the floorboards. The dark wood drank it greedily, as though thirstier than he could ever be. Somewhere in the silence, a whisper bloomed, soft, feminine, and near his ear, though no one stood there. It remembers. The house exhaled. The lamp guttered, and for the first time the breath carried not dust but the faint, metallic tang of blood. The chapter closes with the walls themselves trembling, as if ribs ready to crack, the house drawing in one last deep breath before it decides what, or whom it will release with the next exhale. She descended the stairs barefoot, her silk dragging through the dirt. The boards did not groan beneath her. No, they welcomed her, bowed to her weightless tread, as though she were not mistress of flesh and bone, but something the house itself had birthed from its ribs. Her gown was white, but never clean. The hem gathered soot from the hearths and soil from the yard, so that every step painted her in grey. He watched her in the dim candlelight, the flame shivering as if cowed by her presence. She moved without hurry, without sound, and the silence around her was not absence but demand. It forced his ears to strain, to ache for some human noise, some proof she belonged to the living. Yet the only sound was her gown's whisper along the floor, like snakes brushing the earth. Her eyes found him at once. They always did. She could be turned away, could be speaking soft words to her mirror, but when he entered a room her gaze cut to him like a blade slipping through cloth. Tonight was no different. Barefoot, pale, sharp, she stopped at the foot of the stair, and her stare caught him as surely as shackles never could. "You heard it again," she said, not a question. He lowered his head, but silence betrayed him. She drew nearer, silk dragging ash across the boards. "The house sighs for me," she whispered, her breath cool against his face, though she did not stand close enough to touch. "But you—" She tilted her head, studying him, eyes like knives tracing his skin. "You listen for it." He dared glance up. Her pupils seemed too large, swallowing color, black wells ringed by glass. She smiled faintly, not with warmth, but with the sharpness of someone who had won a wager no one else remembered making. "The house knows me," she continued, almost dreamlike. "But it favors you. Do you know why?" He did not answer. He could not. A slave's words were never his own, and any sound he made could be carried back to her brother's ear, twisted, sharpened, turned to lash. But silence here was no safety either. Her smile thinned, sweet as a poisoned cup. "You will not say," she murmured. "Perhaps you cannot. Still, it is written across you, your shoulders, your eyes." Her hand lifted, not in command, not in cruelty, but in something stranger, darker. She touched his face as if testing the weight of his silence, and her skin was ice. He flinched, but she lingered, her fingers grazing down to his jaw, then falling away with a suddenness that made the air feel heavy. Her laugh was soft, brittle, the sound of glass breaking far away. "So much fear. But fear is the purest truth, isn't it? The house feeds on it, I think, so do I." She turned from him then, silk dragging its grey hem into the parlor. The door yawned wider, and for an instant he saw her reflection in the high black glass of the window, pale figure, knife-like eyes, but her reflection moved before she did, tilting its head in mockery of her steps. The house sighed again, louder this time, rattling shutters, stirring the embers that should not exist. Her gown stirred as though by unseen hands, lifting in the breath. She paused in the doorway, head bowed, listening. "I hear you," she said. Not to him, not to anyone visible. Her lips curled in that strange, secret smile. "And I will answer." The words were not for him, but they pinned him where he stood. Her body vanished into the dark of the parlor, swallowed by soot and silence. He stood, rooted to the floor, skin clammy until her voice, too sweet, too soft, spilled from within the room like spilled milk across stone. "Come closer. Witness if you dare." His feet would not move. His body betrayed him, bound in stillness more complete than any chain. His pulse hammered in his ears, louder than her words, louder than the sighing house. And then, from within the parlor, the embers fled, and in that momentary glow he saw her figure lean toward the hearth, saw the ashes rise like smoke to curl around her, saw her hands stretch into the grey as though welcoming an embrace unseen. The air thickened, her voice carried, but it was no longer hers alone. Another spoke with her, layered, hollow, drawn from the walls, words that were not words, sounds that bent like broken glass. And in that moment he knew. She was not mistress of this house. Not fully, not anymore. When at last her face emerged in the flickering glow, she turned toward the doorway where he stood, eyes gleaming with something colder than firelight. She whispered, a voice too soft and sharp to belong to one woman alone. "You will serve two masters now." The house groaned. The walls inhaled. The flame died. And in the silence that followed, the last thing he heard was the sound of bare feet turning toward him once more. His boots struck the floor like a judge's gavel. Each step rolled through the house, echoing down the spine of the corridor, carrying a finality that left no room for breath. The brother had returned, and with him came silence, the kind that devoured every lesser sound, swallowing it whole until even the insects outside fell mute. The slave, no chains upon him, but bound still, stood where he had been left, water pails spilled, floorboards wet and glistening like a wound. The air had grown so thick it clung to his throat, so when the boots came closer, 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 he could not speak, could not cry, warning even to himself. The door opened. The brother entered. Tall, broad, dark-eyed, carrying on his shoulders the weight of battles no field had ever seen. He smelled of the road, of leather and damp earth, but beneath it lingered something sharper, copper, metal, the tang of blood not yet washed from him. His face was a mask, carved of stone, and his silence was more suffocating than any shout. The mistress trailed him by only a breath of time, her white gown drifting into the hall after him, her eyes flashing toward the slave as if to say, "Do not speak, do not move, do not betray." Her brother's shadow stretched across the boards, blacker than the night pooling in the corners. No servant stirred. Not one. Those who had been lingering vanished into the walls as if the house itself had swallowed them down to avoid his gaze. Even the lamps dimmed, flames bending away from him, shrinking as he passed. He stopped. His boots planted firm on the planks, water soaking the soles where the pail had spilled. He looked down at it, then up, his eyes meeting the slave's. The stare was not anger, not yet. It was judgment, and judgment held no need for rage. Judgment simply was. The silence deepened. A hound outside howled once, cut short, as though struck still in its throat. "You waste water," the brother said at last, voice low, level, but heavy as a coffin lid. The slave lowered his head. Words were demanded, but not permitted. He opened his mouth, yet no sound came. The silence stole it from him, dragged the air back into the house's lungs. The mistress broke it instead, her voice soft, trembling at its edges. It was not his fault. The floor— She stopped, catching her breath, her eyes darting to the parlor door as though it might open on its own. The house shudders. The brother turned to her. Slowly, the way one might turn to an insect crawling too close to the edge of a plate. His stare stripped her down, peeling away silk and skin until only bone seemed left beneath that white gown. "Do not make excuses for him," he said, and though his words were cold, the house itself groaned in answer, like wood splitting beneath a weight too great. The slave's knees weakened. He felt it, not just the silence, but the brother's eyes pressing him into the floor. He remembered the old words of the kitchen woman, long buried. Chains are not always forged of iron. Sometimes they are gaze. Sometimes they are silence. The mistress reached for her brother's arm, a pale hand upon his black coat. Her voice softened into something coaxing, dangerous. "The house has been restless. You feel it too." He did not move, did not blink. His silence was answer enough, but the house did answer. From the parlor came a rattle, faint at first, then sharper. A scrape, like nails dragging through soot. A sigh rising from the hearth, though no fire lived there. The brother's gaze shifted, not to the slave, not to his sister, but to the parlor door. His hand twitched once at his side, as if resisting the urge to draw steel. The mistress smiled. It was small, secret, bitter. "You see now." The slave dared lift his eyes then, only to catch what passed between them. Something older than kinship, older than blood. An understanding neither spoke aloud. An agreement carried in silence, one that wrapped him tighter than any rope. The parlor door shuddered as though pressed from within. Dust fell from its frame. The brother's boots shifted, slow, deliberate, as he moved toward it. And in the hush that followed, the house exhaled one long, mournful breath. The lamp nearest them went out, drowning half the hall in shadow. The brother placed his hand upon the parlor door, and from the other side, something knocked 3 times, slow as the tolling of a bell. The slave was never shackled, yet he never escaped. The others whispered of chains rattling in the night, of iron biting raw into wrists and ankles. But his bonds were not of metal. His bonds were eyes, her eyes sharp as glass, his eyes heavy as stone. Wherever he stood, he felt them upon him. Even in solitude, even in the fields, even in the hush of the forest's edge, he could not breathe without imagining their gaze tightening around his throat. The house knew it too. The walls leaned close when he passed, their sighs drawing out his name, though no lips moved. At times he thought the doors breathed with him, opening when he tried to flee, closing when he longed for silence, groaning like ribs pressed too hard. On that night, after the knocking at the parlor door, the brother had not spoken. Not to him, not to her. He had only touched the wood as though testing flesh. When he withdrew his hand, dust lingered on his palm, but his eyes carried something heavier. He left without a word, his boots tolling down the hall like hammer blows. The mistress remained, her silk gown brushing ash as she stood, smiling faintly at the empty parlor. "Do you see?" she whispered, and though her gaze lingered on the door, the words struck him. "It has chosen us, all of us." Her laughter followed as she ascended the stair, bare feet silent against the boards. He could have run then. The night air pressed against the shutters, thick with crickets, with the restless groan of hounds. The yard was dark, the fields darker still. No lock barred the door, no chain bound his hands. But when he reached for the handle, the wood pulsed beneath his palm, warm, alive, beating. It was as though the house itself clutched his wrist. He drew back, breath ragged. Later, in the servants' quarters, sleep mocked him. He lay staring at the rafters, hearing their breaths, their sighs. A woman snored softly beside her child. Another muttered in her dreams. Yet beneath those mortal sounds, the house's rhythm thrummed, deep, steady, like a second heart beneath the floorboards. A whisper slipped through the cracks. Not hers, not his. The house said, "Stay." He turned in his pallet, nails clawing the thin blanket. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the word was not in his ears, it was inside him, carried in his ribs, pulsing in his blood. The next day, no lash drove him to the fields. The mistress summoned him instead. He climbed the stairs in daylight, the sun pouring through tall windows, gilding dust that spun like ash. She sat at her vanity, comb dragging through her pale hair. The mirror reflected her, but not him. He stood behind her shoulder, but the glass gave back only her and the vast yawning room. She smiled without looking. "You stand as if chained," he swallowed, throat dry. Silence was safer, always safer. "You know why?" she continued, voice light, sing-song. "You could run. None would stop you. And yet," she tapped her comb against the mirror, a slow rhythm, each strike a nail into the coffin of his freedom. "Yet you do not." Her eyes cut to his reflectionless figure. "The house holds you." "As I do." The door creaked open. Her brother entered without knock, without greeting. His shadow stretched long across the carpet, devouring light. The mistress's smile thinned. "You see how he obeys," she said to her brother. Not for whip, not for coin. But for us, the brother said nothing. He only looked at the slave, a silence deeper than chains, a silence that bound tighter than iron. The slave lowered his gaze, and in that moment he felt it, the walls leaning closer, listening, sighing. The invisible chains tightened, links of silence wrapping him, pulling taut. He could not run. He could not hide. He belonged to the house now, and from somewhere deep within the walls came a sound like laughter, low, hollow, inhuman. The lamps flickered. The brother's shadow stretched further, and the chains that were never locked pulled so tight across his chest he thought his ribs would snap. The candles bent low as though listening. Their flames did not dance in joy, but leaned crooked, bent like ears toward mouths that whispered sins. Wax dripped in long strings, pale as bone marrow, coating the silver candlesticks in a shroud that looked more funerary than festive. The table stretched long beneath their glow, a coffin of polished oak draped in linen the color of old shrouds. The mistress sat at one end, her gown still white, though ash stained its hem. Her brother sat at the other, boots planted firm, his silence as heavy as stone laid upon a grave. Between them lay platters of roasted meat, untouched bread, and goblets filled deep with red wine that gleamed too dark, too thick. The slave stood at the table's side, pouring, serving, silent. His hands obeyed, but his eyes betrayed him, sliding always toward the candles. Their flames curved toward the wine as he filled the cups, as though eager to listen to what the liquid might carry. No one spoke. Not at first, only the sound of knives against meat, forks scratching porcelain. The house sighed around them, slow, rhythmic, the walls flexing as though swollen with breath. At last the mistress lifted her glass. "To return," she said softly, her voice sweet as a lullaby gone sour. "To home, to blood, to bond." The brother did not echo her. He raised his glass, but his lips remained closed. The mistress's smile tightened, but she drank, her throat working in the silence. The wine clung to the glass like clotting blood. When she set it down, her eyes fixed on the slave, sharp as knives. "Drink," she whispered. He froze. Slaves did not drink at table. Slaves did not sit. Yet her command was not spoken as one might order. It was invitation. And in her gaze lay something more dangerous than kindness. He shook his head, subtle, near invisible. Her lips curved, a cruel, secret smile. "You fear it," she said, "not to him, but to the heir, to the house. As you should. For every glass holds a secret, and once swallowed, it cannot be given back." The brother's fork scraped hard against his plate, a sound like bones splintering. His eyes lifted to hers, cold, unblinking. "Enough," he said. One word, final. But the house did not heed him. The candles bent lower, flame tips nearly touching the wine. The goblets trembled, and from somewhere deep within the house came a murmur. Not words, but layered sounds, like a dozen voices speaking at once behind the walls. The mistress's smile widened. She pressed her palm against the table as though steadying herself, but the wood pulsed beneath her touch, swelling, trembling, alive. "Do you hear?" she whispered. "It listens." The slave's hands tightened around the wine bottle. He dared glance at the brother, and saw in his eyes the silence thickening, not of disbelief, but of knowledge unspoken. He knew. He had always known. The mistress leaned forward, her voice low, sweet, poisonous. "Confess." The word struck like a lash. It was not aimed at him, not at her brother, but at the air itself. The walls groaned in answer. The wine rippled in its cups, red waves lapping like the tongue of some beast. The brother's hand tightened on his knife. The mistress's glass tipped, spilling crimson across the white cloth. The stain spread quick, blooming like fresh blood, seeping toward the slave's hand where it rested on the table. And in the hush that followed, he heard it, the wine itself whispering soft, curling into words he was never meant to hear. Secrets, sins, promises. The voices of the house poured into every goblet, waiting to be swallowed, his breath caught, chest aching. For a moment he saw his reflection in the wine. But it was not his face, only a faceless shadow. Mouth wide, whispering back, the candles bent lower, wax dripping fast, flames kissing the table. The mistress raised her cup again, her voice trembling with ecstasy. "To the house." The brother's knife struck the table, metal ringing like a warning bell. But the toast had already been made, and the house drank with them. Was it comfort or command? The hand fell upon his shoulder in the dark, and for one quivering heartbeat it felt human, skin on skin, warmth through cloth. But the warmth was wrong, too still, too deep. It burned not like heat, but like a memory pressed into flesh, leaving its print inside him rather than upon him. He had been sent to clear the table, to gather the goblets streaked red, the plates half-eaten and cold. The candles guttered low, wax clotted, flames stuttering as though suffocated by their own smoke. The mistress had drifted upstairs in her white gown, humming low, trailing the sound like a thread for someone, or something, to follow. The brother had vanished without a word, boots silent on the hall floor. The house was his only company. Its size rose and fell around him, steady now, rhythmic as the tide. He stacked the plates, fingers slick with wine, and felt the floor beneath his bare feet pulse. Not tremble, not shift. Pulse. Then the touch came. He froze, every muscle locked. The plates in his arms trembled. The hand upon his shoulder pressed gently, a weight no heavier than a bird, but it burned, slow and deliberate, as though fire smoldered beneath his skin. A voice whispered near his ear, too close, too soft. "You serve." "You stay," he twisted fast, heart hammering. The hall was empty. Shadows lay thick across the walls, their edges moving as if breathing. No one stood behind him, yet the hand remained. Its print glowed, faint and dark, a mark beneath his shirt as though bruises bloomed where it had touched. He staggered backward, plates clattering to the floor. Porcelain shattering sharp as teeth. Silence devoured the sound before it could echo. From upstairs came the faintest rustle, the mistress's voice, humming a lullaby in a language he did not know. Beneath it, lower like a counterpoint, the walls hummed too, a droning that rose from the floorboards like bees sealed in wax. He pressed his palm to his shoulder. The mark burned through the cloth, pulsing in time with the house's size. He backed toward the stairwell, eyes locked on the hall's end where the shadows thickened. The parlor door hung open still, black as a moor. From within came no glow, no embers, only a darkness that shimmered faintly like heat over a grave. The whisper came again. Not from the air this time, from inside his chest. "Stay." He gripped the banister, breath ragged. The wood beneath his hand was warm, almost soft. A heartbeat pulsed within it. Faint but sure, as though the stair itself were alive, he climbed. One step, two, the house exhaled. Dust sifted from the ceiling, ash-smelling, clinging to his hair. Halfway up, he stopped. She stood at the top of the stairs, the mistress in her white gown, her hair unbound, her eyes black as pitch. She smiled faintly, but her lips did not move with her voice when it came. "It marks you now," she whispered. "The house has touched you." He swallowed, unable to speak. Her bare feet left no sound as she descended one step toward him, then another. The shadows clung to her like hands, pulling her gown's hem into strange shapes, as though something unseen followed behind. She reached out her own hand, slow, graceful. "Come," he shook his head, stepping back. But the mark on his shoulder pulsed once, hot, and his knees buckled. He gripped the banister tighter. The house's sigh rose louder, almost a moan. The boards shifted underfoot. He swore he felt fingers pressing up from beneath, pushing through the wood, trying to catch his heels. Her hand hovered inches from his face now. Her eyes gleamed in the dim. "You feel it," she breathed. "You cannot run now. Not from me. Not from it." Her brother's voice cut through the dark then. From somewhere unseen, a low command stripped of warmth. "Bring him." The stairwell went black, as if the house had inhaled all light at once, and in that blind moment, the hand on his shoulder tightened, not her hand, not his brother's, but the house's, and he felt himself drawn upward into the dark. The wood seemed to pulse around the circle of his stare. The brother bent low, his shadow stretching across the hallway, swallowing the lamplight, his breath so quiet it seemed the house held it for him. One eye fixed to the keyhole, the other hidden in shadow. He had done this before. Too many times. The slave knew it. The mistress knew it. The house, most of all, knew it. Each time his gaze pressed through the lock, the air grew heavy, as if the walls themselves curved inward to protect or to conceal what he watched. Inside the chamber, the mistress moved, bare feet whispering across the floorboards, white gown trailing in ash. She did not sing now. She only breathed, long, slow, deliberate. Her mirror caught her figure, and though she smiled toward it, her reflection did not smile back. The slave stood in the corner of the room, still as the furniture, the mark on his shoulder burning with every breath. He had not been commanded to move, yet he remained because command lived now inside his blood. His silence was its own chain. The brother's eye at the keyhole twitched. He pressed closer, knuckles whitening against the wood. Within, the mistress lifted her hands to the mirror. "Show me," she whispered. Not to her brother, not to the slave, but to the house itself. The glass rippled faintly, like water disturbed by breath. Shadows deepened, stretching long across the chamber until they coiled about the slave's feet. The brother's jaw clenched. His lips did not part, but his eye drank every motion, every whisper. He was judge, he was witness, he was thief of moments never meant to be seen. The slave dared glance toward the door, toward that watching circle of absence, and for a heartbeat, just one, he met the brother's gaze through the keyhole. The wood around the hole shivered. The iron ring trembled, and in that instant he felt it. Not just the brother watching, but the house watching through him. The eye at the keyhole was not one eye, but many, stacked behind it, pressing forward like worms straining from the dark. The mistress turned, her own gaze finding the door. She smiled faintly, knowingly. "Do you see, brother?" she asked aloud. "Do you see what it does to him?" The slave's skin crawled. Her words were bait, cast toward the watching eye. The silence stretched thick as tar. Then came the sound, low, hollow, drawn from the walls themselves. The house exhaled, and the air through the keyhole stank of soot and copper. The brother inhaled it. The slave staggered, clutching his shoulder as the mark burned hotter, as though the eye upon him seared from inside the wood. He saw the brother's shadow shift, longer now, darker, spilling across the chamber floor even though he had not entered. The mistress laughed, a brittle, glass-sharp sound. "Carry it, then. If you must watch, then carry what you see." The mirror flickered. For a moment the slave saw his own face in it, faceless, blurred, erased. The mistress's reflection smiled, though she did not. And behind them both, in the corner of the glass, the brother's eye bloomed wide, filling the mirror as though the keyhole had burst into a mouth. The slave stumbled backward, chest heaving. The shadows at his feet slithered higher, curling around his legs. The mistress only watched, serene. Outside the door, the brother pulled back from the keyhole at last, his face pale, his silence deeper than before. He turned, and where his eye had pressed the wood, a black smear lingered, as though the house itself had left soot where it touched him. He carried it with him. Back into the walls, back into the silence, and the house groaned, its sigh stretching long like laughter buried deep beneath the floor. The mistress stood before the mirror, smiling at her phantom. Her white gown shimmered faintly in the lamplight, yet the glass caught none of its glow. It drank the light instead, swallowing her shape until what stood within the frame was not quite her, but something thinner, hollower, stretched too long in the limbs, a shadow child of her body, smiling where she did not. The slave lingered by the wall, throat dry. He had learned by now not to trust the glass. It had tricks, cruelties of its own. Still, he could not stop looking. The mirror showed him too, or should have. But where his body stood, there was nothing. Only the frame of the chamber, a faceless absence where he should be. His breath caught. He touched his own chest, his face, his arms, solid, trembling, but in the glass he was erased, like a body blotted from the world. The mistress tilted her head, her smile growing wider in the reflection than upon her real lips. "Do you see?" she whispered, not to him but to the thing inside the glass. "It remembers only what it chooses, and it does not choose you." Her phantom smile split further, teeth glinting where none should gleam. The mirror bent her beauty into cruelty, and yet she did not turn away. Instead, she pressed her hand to the glass. Her reflection pressed back, but the hand inside the mirror was not a hand at all. It was pale, bone-thin, stretching into claws. The slave's stomach knotted. He wanted to leave, to step back into shadow, but the mark upon his shoulder flared with heat, rooting him where he stood. The mirror's emptiness mocked him. He could not bear to see himself gone. And then, movement. Behind the mistress's phantom, the brother appeared. Not outside the glass, not in the room, but within the mirror itself. His figure wavered like smoke, his face eaten by shadow, his single eye glowing faint through the dark. He stood where he had no right to stand, where no door had opened, where no step had sounded. The slave staggered forward. "Mistress," he rasped, though the word barely left his throat. She did not answer. Her reflection turned, slow as a blade being drawn, and there the brother was, waiting, watching, smiling faintly, as though the mirror itself had claimed him. The real mistress turned finally, and her eyes fell on the slave. "Why do you tremble? Do you not see? The mirror shows us as we are, not as we pretend to be." The slave's chest heaved. His absence in the glass was a wound. He reached toward it, desperate, fingers brushing the cold frame. For a moment he thought he felt it himself, just beyond the silver surface, trapped, erased. The mirror shuddered. The surface rippled like black water. The mistress's phantom leaned forward, teeth too sharp, eyes too hollow, and the brother's shadow stepped closer, pressing his face near the slave's empty place. His voice came muffled as though spoken through a coffin wall. "You do not belong in glass. You do not belong in memory." The slave yanked his hand back, breath ragged. The mark on his shoulder burned with such violence that tears pricked his eyes. The mirror laughed, not aloud, but through its trembling, its shivering, its hollow mimicry of breath. The mistress turned back to her phantom. She smiled, serene. He carries nothing in this house, not even his own face. And in the glass her reflection leaned forward, lips parting as though to kiss her own. Yet what it kissed was not her, but the brother's shadow grinning between them. The slave shut his eyes, but still he felt the weight of his erasure pressing against him like dirt on a grave. The crickets stopped first. Their thin legs, their hidden choirs snuffed out mid-chirp. Then the owls followed, tucking their heads beneath their wings as though ashamed to see. Even the wind retreated from the fields, leaving the night swollen and heavy, like a lung full of unspoken words. The slave felt it at once, the silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something larger pressing down upon the house. It was like standing beneath deep water, the surface far above, the weight endless. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a confession. Every breath seemed stolen. He had thought the house alive before. Now he knew it was awake. Outside his window the trees stiffened, their branches unmoving, fingers frozen in mid-gesture. The stars above flickered faintly, like candles starving for air. He felt the mark on his shoulder pulse in time with his heartbeat, once, twice, then slower, dragging. Down the hall the mistress moved barefoot again. The whisper of her silk sounded louder than footsteps. She did not carry a candle. She did not need to. The dark bent for her, parted around her like water around a blade. She did not glance at him as she passed, but he heard her murmur to the air, to no one and to everyone at once. "They're hiding. Even the earth hides from what's coming." He followed, though his legs felt carved from stone. Each board beneath his feet gave a hollow groan, as though warning him back. The hall stretched longer than before, the doors multiplying, each knob and eye turned away. When he reached the dining room, she was already there. The long table stood untouched, though the candles bent low, their flames shuddering as though listening. Wine glimmered in crystal glasses, though no one had poured it. "Sit," she said softly, her voice like a moth brushing his ear. "The feast will not wait." He sat because he always sat. His hands trembled against his knees. Outside, the silence deepened. No frogs, no nightbirds, no skittering of mice. Even the walls seemed to lean inward, breathing slowly, deliberately. She poured wine into his cup, though he did not see her lift the bottle. The liquid was dark, almost black. It smelled of iron, not grapes. "This house was built on breath," she whispered, "on lungs that were not our own. When it sighs, the world listens. When it grows quiet," she broke off, tilting her head. Her eyes flicked toward the window, toward the fields where the trees did not move. The slave swallowed, throat dry. "Mistress?" She smiled faintly. "Do you hear it?" He shook his head. "I hear nothing. That is what you hear," she said. "Nothing." The candles guttered, bent toward him. The air thickened until he could taste it, soil and copper like earth freshly turned over a grave. The window pane rippled, though no wind touched it. Then the house exhaled. It was not a sigh this time. It was a sound deeper, older, a rumble dragged from the boards, the beams, the bones beneath the floor. The glasses trembled. The liquid inside them darkened further, as though thickening into something not meant to be drunk. And somewhere deep within the walls, far beneath them, a chain clinked once, then again. Then stopped. The mistress raised her cup. "To what we cannot bury," she said. The slave could not lift his own. His hands would not move. His mouth tasted of ash. Above them the ceiling seemed to lower, the plaster stretching down like a throat swallowing. The silence pressed harder until his ears rang, and then a sound. Not outside, not inside, but under everything. A low, wet, dragging noise, as though something vast had begun to crawl upward from the soil, pulling the night with it. The mistress smiled at him, eyes like twin lanterns. "They will not watch," she whispered. "So you will." The dragging grew louder. The air congealed. Something cold and damp brushed the slave's ankle beneath the table. He did not dare look. At dawn, the floorboards gleamed wet. The sun had not yet risen, yet the house was already lit, not by light, but by the sheen of something slick upon the wood, seeping between the cracks. It glowed faintly red in the half-dark, as though the boards themselves had bled through the night. The slave awoke where he had fallen, cheek pressed to the table, the air sharp with iron. His breath hitched. His hands, sticky against the grain, left prints when he tried to lift them, prints darker than his skin, darker than any shadow. The mistress sat at the head of the table, her gown spotless white despite the stains that spread beneath her feet. Her hands rested neatly before her, fingers folded as if in prayer. She did not look at him, not at first. Her gaze was fixed on the wall, on something he could not see. The silence from the night had not lifted. The owls still refused to call. The crickets had not returned. Even the rooster beyond the fields did not crow. It was a silence that held its breath, waiting. The brother entered without sound. His boots, once striking the floor like a gavel, now sank soundlessly into the wet boards, leaving no mark. His face was pale, his lips colorless, and in his eyes something lingered, something that had come through the mirror, or through the silence, or through the house itself. He stopped beside the mistress. She did not turn. He did not speak. The slave shifted, the floor groaning beneath him. The sound was too loud, too sharp. Both heads turned to him at once. Their eyes did not blink. He swallowed. What has been done? His voice cracked. The mistress's smile was faint, her lips trembling with delight or dread. He could not tell which. Nothing has been done, she whispered, and everything has been witnessed. The brother's hand flexed at his side, as if he held something invisible. His gaze slid to the slave's shoulder, to the mark burned there, still red, still raw. You carry it, he said. His voice was flat, empty. You always carried it. The slave staggered to his feet. His eyes fell to the boards. The wet sheen spread outward, seeping toward the walls, toward the windows, even dripping faintly from the ceiling above. It smelled of copper, of earth, of old smoke. It clung to him when he breathed. His eyes darted to the mirror hanging across the room. It too was wet, the glass rippling with red streaks that slid down and pooled at its base. Within, he saw the mistress smiling, the brother staring, and himself erased, absent, gone. His knees buckled. No, he whispered. No, I am here, I am here. The mirror disagreed. The mistress finally rose. She glided to him, her gown untouched, her bare feet leaving no ripple in the spreading stain. She laid her hand upon his face, cool, almost tender. You were here, she said softly, but the house has decided otherwise. The brother's eye flicked toward the window, where dawn should have been. But the light did not come. Only a grey pallor seeped across the fields, thin as a shroud. The house creaked. The floor beneath them sighed. And from deep within its beams the sound came again, the clink of a chain, dragging once, then twice, then falling still. The mistress leaned close, her lips at the slave's ear. Do you not feel it? The blood is not theirs. It is not ours. It is the house remembering. The brother stepped forward, his shadow stretching blacker than the stains beneath them. His whisper was colder still. And you are part of its memory now. The slave's chest heaved. He looked down. His palms, his arms, his chest, all smeared, dripping. The blood was not only on him, it was from him leaking, pulled from his skin without wound, feeding the boards beneath. The mistress stepped back, watching. The brother did not move. The house sighed once more. And the slave fell, face striking the wet boards as the silence swallowed him whole. The dawn did not break, only the stain remained.